The help of Hashem, we are learning Chagiga, Daf, Chai, Daf Yud Ches, and Taka. This will be the Chayis, the core of the whole Masechta. As we mentioned in the beginning, that Chagiga is so powerful that it has in it basically half Kachim and the other half of Taras. And Daf Chai, what greater Daf, is where we switch over from one to the other. Now, firstly, we left off on Daf Yud Zayin Amid Beis. We left off at the end of the narrow line, of the last narrow line. It's the middle of the Amid. We began on Daf Yud Zayin Amid Aleph, Rabbi Lazar, Rabbi Oishia, asking, from where do we know that you have this din of compensation known as Tashlumin? Tashlumin for the karbanos of Re'iyah and Chagiga that should be brought on the first day. According to Beis Hillel, they are brought on the first day, even if it's regardless, right? It's Yom Tiv. According to Beis Hillel, you can bring it. Parenthetically, even according to Beis Hillel, if Shavuos or any first day of Yom Tiv falls out on Shabbos Kodesh, then you don't bring the Oila, you don't bring the Chagiga. Because you're not allowed to do the malaches, even though communal karbanos override Shabbos, not the personal re'iyah and chagiga. The Torah doesn't use the words bimoy adam or bimoy adoi when it comes to these two karbanos. But the rule is that when a person did not bring these two sacrifices on the first day of Yom Tov, they can compensate for it by bringing it over the next 7 and Sukkot 8 days. Even though Shavuos is followed by Yemei Choil, still there is a din of Tashlumin for Shavuos. And the Gemara began on the Amud Aleph. How do we know that? What's the source? And Rabbi Oishia brought this Chag HaMatzos, Chag Shavuos, Chag HaSukkos, and we learn from Chag HaMatzos, where the Torah writes, as we quoted, V'chagoisem oisa Lashem, V'chagoisem oisa Chag Lashem, Shivas Yomim, that Chagiga can be brought for all of the 7 days. So we learn Shavuos, we learn it from Chag HaPesach, because of the rule of Tofasta Meyuta in the Tofasta. We're going to have a little bit back and forth trying to refute Rabbi Oishia, but he's going to stand. And then we will have again, like we mentioned yesterday in the last year, we're going to have 2 other sources for this din. Now, what we're going to open up on Daf Yud Ches is something that we spoke about a lot in Moed Katan, but one of the main sources from the Rishonim questioning whether the Isur Melacha on Chol Hamoed is Doiraisa or the Rabbanan, even though everyone knows the Psukim. Question is, do we view these psukim as a asmachta or not? One of the main sources will be Chagiga Daf Yud Ches, that we're going to read the Rashi inside, we'll read the Rabbeinu Tam, the Tosfos, that they disagree. According to Rashi, the prohibition of working on Chol Hamoed is an Isur Doiraisa, even though it is unusual that for biblical prohibitions we have exceptions, and we have the 5 exceptions that we're going to review, that we had in Moed Katan, beginning with Davar Ha'aved. But there are other 4, there's a total of 5 hetenim why one will be allowed to do work. Rashi holds, even though it's an Isur Do'eraisa, still Hashem gave a lot of exceptions where one may do work on Chol Hamoed versus Shitas Tosfos and many other Rishonim, specifically because we don't find by a biblical prohibition to have so many ways out, so many loopholes. You can't do it, but here you could, and there you could, and there you could, and you end up coming today. Again, one of the beautiful things that the takeaway from Moed Katan was to approach Chol Hamoed the right way. The right way is that even though in our world there are many things that we end up doing, to understand it, we begin, Chol Hamoed is a Moed. Elamah, there are certain heterim. So that's going to be here, Chagiga Yud Ches, and just to give a few words of intro that we'll review when we begin the Mishnah. We'll see how far we get in, and we're going to learn this until the end of the Masechta. But Chevre, here we go. We said that in Avodah Zarah Daf Chaf Amud Beis, Pinchas Ben Yoir, the various steps. So there also you have the step of Kachim, and that leads us to the step of Tara, which leads us to Ruach HaKodesh and to Tchias HaMesim. I know I skipped many steps, but there's a big koyach in learning Daf Yud Ches. There are 5 levels of items when it comes to the laws of Tuma and Tara, as we will see. That will be the yisoid of the whole ending of the Masechta. You have Chulin, non-consecrated food, that has the lowest standard of Tahara. Actually, theoretically, or not only theoretically, one doesn't have to eat Chulin betara, even though during the times of the second Beis Hamikdash, many people took upon themselves to eat Chulin betahara. Now, many people should know the following, that when you say the word betara, I know it's a very nice word, but there are many details to it. Because the people that were more parush in a positive way, and they ate chulin, they ate it betara. But then there's something called altaras truma, or al taharas hakodesh. As we'll explain, there are different levels of tahara. So you have chulim, just to get the klolim. One step above it is ma'aser sheni, in which there's more of a need of a person consuming it b'tahara. There is an importance of not allowing the ma'aser sheni itself to become tamei, because then one will not be allowed to consume it, and we should ideally be consuming ma'aser sheni in Yerushalayim. The one notch above that is going to be truma. The one notch above that is going to be kachim. And the one notch above it is what we will paskin mechatos, even though there's a machlokes rishonim, but just to be consistent, in other words, the waters that are already mixed with the ashes, which are going to be used to sprinkle on people that became tamei with corpse tuma on the third and the seventh day, that it's so delicate that it's susceptible to the most minute amount of tum and tara. We will also be reviewing the basic dinim of yodayim arshniyos letuma midrabanan, and the importance of clarifying that there are three main reasons, which we'll divide into two groups, as to why our hands, by default, tamei on a rabbinic tuma on the level of a sheni. So let me already speak out over here in the intro to review. We had this last time substantially in Psachim. There's the source of all tuma, which is a corpse. The corpse is called avi avos hatuma. There is a rule with exceptions. But the rule is that when there is halachic contact between an item, food, a person, with a source of tuma, normally the tuma goes down one notch. So we begin with avi avos hatuma. The one notch down is av hatuma. Many times tuma doesn't have to begin with avi avos. There are many items that taka does not begin with avi avos. There are many people by tuma that's yoytze megufay. We're going to get familiarized with these terms as we go through the suga. We have many dafim of this, but you have a nida, you have a zav, you have a zava, you have a mitzayra, plus you have that they have a status of an av. You have a nevela, you have a sheretz. And then again, if there's halachic contact, you have to know what halachic contact means between the source of tuma and something else, not anything else, but something else. Again, you go from av to rishon, or same from av to vlad. The words are more symmetric. Father to vlad. Now the word vlad, the child of tuma, is a very generic word. The word vlad hatuma can go to rishon, sheni, shlishi, revi, chamishi. But when we want to get into details, so it goes from af to rishon. Now, can rishon be mitame with tashva, which means could it convey tuma? Depends to what. Rishon biblically cannot convey tuma, not to people, not to utensils. It could convey tuma to food and drink. Biblically, rabbinically, let's go. Source number one, that if a person's hands touched something that's on the level of a rishon, midrabanan only, their hands become tamei. What's unique is so many things. First of all, that they're sheni on Adam. Number two, it's only their hands. Biblically, either the whole person is tamei or not. Another interesting din regarding yodayim, that to get rid of the tuma, you only have to wash your hands. You don't even have to go to the mikvah. Another source of tumas yodayim is what we learned in the Shmoina Asar Davar, in the Sugi and Shabbos, and that is if we touch scripture. Counterintuitive. That's why we're so careful, as we learned also in Megillah, never to touch the inside of a Sefer Torah. That was a siyum, right? That was in the last daf of Masechtas Megillah. And if a person touched the insides of any halachically written part of Tanakh, we're not speaking about a sefer, what we call a book. We're speaking about a scroll. Then the hands become tamei. These are two reasons why the hands become tamei. And then there's another, then not to confuse it. Stam yadayim shniyas latuma. Stam yadayim is a whole different thing. It's very important. Stam yadayim means that since hands are always moving around and we're not aware where the hands are touching, therefore the hands is a part of the body that could be physically unclean. This is the first time we're speaking about something gashmias. If a person is going to touch truma with unclean hands, or if they're going to touch kachim, what might happen? They might soil the truma and the kachim. And truma should be consumed. Kachim is a mitzvah to consume it. It's unbecoming to make it not physically clean. So to prevent truma and kachim of becoming begashmias, repulsive, that's the nigladika reason of stam yadayim. Chazal said, unless you are aware of where your hands touched or not, By default, your hands have a status of Yodayim. Now, what we are not going to be learning about is about Netilas Yodayim for eating bread. That's Takana Shloima HaMelech. We're not going there. We're speaking about these three sources of Yodayim Shniyas Latuma. And again, how do you get rid of the Tumah? Sometimes just washing Netilas Yodayim. Sometimes you have to put it into Memsa. And what will be amazing is that becoming pure for Chulin, which would be if I go into the mikvah, to become pure for Chulin, since my kavanah was in order for me to eat Chulin, even though again we're going to learn tomorrow, do you b'chlal have to become pure to eat Chulin? Not necessarily, but it doesn't matter. If I went to the mikvah for Chulin, you know what? I'm only considered pure for Chulin. If I want to eat Ma'aser Sheni and I know that I had no contact with Truma, doesn't matter. I need to go l'shem Truma. If I went for Truma, it's not good for Kachim. If I went for Kachim, it's not good for Mechatos. One other detail about this conveying of and going down one notch. So how far does Truma go? This we learned good in Pesachim. So Avi Avos, Ta'av, Terishoin, Chulin, the end of the line by Chulin Sheni, even though there was a machloikis, if you remember in Pesachim, I think Rabbi Kiva holds it goes to Shlishi. We don't paskin that way. Truma can even become a Shlishi. Kachim can even become a Revi'i, and Mechatas can become a Chamishi. And the final, just quick intro, is that there's the word Pasul and Tamei. Now, generally, we always use the word Tamei. But when we will learn together, the word Pasul in the context of the laws of Tum and Tara, the reason why Rabbeinu HaKadosh, the Tanoim, use that nuance of a difference is because when you are already at the end of the line, like Truma can only become a Shlishi. It means if this Truma, that Shlishi, has contact with other Truma, the other Truma will remain completely pure. Because since it normally goes down a notch, Truma cannot become a Revi. So Shlishi L'Tamei is called Pasul. Sheni L'Truma is called Tamei. Because Tamei means it is Tamei, and it's still able to be mitama something on its level. Now, I know that Truma can be mitama kachim, but we call it pasul because pasul means that if it's touching something on its level, you are at the end of the line. Pasul, if it can still go further, it's called Tamei. I think that's a general intro. A lot more details will be learned, and we have to learn how to develop a special chayis in learning the dinim of Tum and Tara. Okay, so Chevra, let's go back now. On Daf Yud Zayin, Amid Beis, again, we are in the middle of the last narrow line. It's mamash the middle of the Amid. Rabbi Lazar, Amar Rabbi Oishia, Minayin letashlumin called Shiva. So we had that hekish as we spoke out. So frek the Gemara, Tashima. The whole premise, I have a question on this tashlumin of 7 days. We're quoting a Baraisa. It says in the Baraisa, Mishalei Chag. Shiva Yemei Pesach. Mishalei Chag means, we have to remember, whoever did not bring the carbon Chagiga. That's the beauty about learning Masechtas Chagiga. Prior to that, you don't understand what you're saying. It sounds like someone, didn't keep Yontif. That's not what it means in the Tanoim. Mishalei Chag means if someone did not bring the carbon Chagiga, or a person did not bring the Chagiga during the 8 days of Chag, meaning of Sukkos, or, now, we're going to follow the version of the Gra. We will not have the word Rishon. We do have a Rashi Tevis, which is foundational. I know that when you see these letters, Yud Vav Tes, you read it Yom Tif, but as we'll see in a moment, you can read this Yom Tevoyach. That will make all the difference. That's where there was a confusion. And I want you to know that many times things got confused that way. So let's read it out Yom Tif. The Yom Tov Shel Atzeres. If you didn't bring it on Yom Tov Shel Atzeres, Shuv and a Chaygik. My friends, no, Taich. If the Braisa is saying, if you did not bring a Chagiga on the Yom Tov of Atzeres, which is a 1 day Yom Tov, Shuv ein a Chaygig, that knocks away the whole din of Tashlumim. Now, this is not a problem with the Mishnah. Let's just quickly review. The Mishnah spoke about Yom Tevoyach. We already know Tashlumim, so we incorporated the Yom Tevoyach. Yom Tevoyach literally means the day in which you slaughter many karbanos. Lebei Shammai, the Yom Tevoyach was always the day after Yom Tov for Oilas Re'iyah. Even according to Beis Hillel, when Shavuos falls out on Shabbos, there was something called Yom Tevoyach, which means since you may not bring, not the Re'iyah, not the Chagiga on Shabbos, even according to Beis Hillel, you have to bring it the day after. That's clear in the Mishnah. But you don't have in our Mishnah the words Tashlumin. Without the premise of the Amoraim, which are telling you there's something called Tashlumin, and Yom Tevoyach, ideally do it sooner than later. But if you didn't do it on Sunday, you can do it on Monday. You have the whole 6 days after Shavuos. The Gemara is saying, no, maybe not. It says in the Brisa that if you didn't bring it on the first day on Yom Tiv, Yeshuv and Chagiga. My love, Yom Tov Shel Atzeres. You see, Yom Tov means my love. Read the abbreviation Yud Vav Tes as Yom Tov. So the Gemara says, no, Yud Vav Tes is Yom Tovayach. I got a problem. I get it. Yom Tovayach means after Yom Tov, but Yom Tovayach is in the singular. So you didn't really resolve the question, because Rabbi Oishia was based on the premise not only that there's something called Tashlumin, but you have a whole 7 days, including Yom Tov. Fragt die Gemara, no. Shkoyach, it's Yom Tovayach, but he yachin nifshet mina, that it's only Yom Tovayach, the Chad Yom, and not 6 more days. Answers the Gemara, Ema, Yimei Tibuach against the Rashi Tevis. See how beautiful this is? You write the letters Vav, Yud, Vav, what's it called, an apostrophe? The Tush Terechalach, Danny Fishman, I hope won't scream tomorrow, and Tes. So you have Yemei Tevuach, Hamachaya, it fits. Next, Toshima, it says in Abra.
To get rid of the word Harishin.
That's why you have to get rid of that's why it doesn't fit. Now I just want to say like this, that B'chlal, when it comes to modifying Gersois, I even think it's one of the Rishonim somewhere in these dafim, that write very importantly, you cannot logically modify a Gersa, even if it doesn't make sense. The way it's done is that you have to find another old source written. So if you have 2 Gersois, then we use our Seichel to see which one makes the most sense. If something doesn't make sense, we can have a kasha, we can live with kashas. We never change the girsa just because it doesn't fit. No, it's the Gra had another girsa here. It wasn't stam. Okay. Toshima, it says in the Braisa, the Tani Rabba, Bar Shmuel, that Omra Torah Menei Yomim V'Kadesh Chodesh. The Torah writes somewhere, now there's a whole gewalt. Where exactly did the Torah say count days and be Makadesh to Chodesh? Let's go that there's a mitzvah to bring a korban on Rosh Chodesh. We're speaking about in the context of korbanis, as you'll see. And how do you consecrate a Chodesh, Kiddush HaChodesh? And with all the pratim that we learned a little bit together, we learned a little bit of Rosh Hashanah, we have the Schus Ri'olim de Rambam, the Rambam was Megala de Soitro Ibur. No, that aside of us, we don't go like with Rabbeinu Hanan. We paskin that the main way of establishing a calendar is through witnesses that testify the moon, but there was a mitzvah. On the Beis Din, they should be familiar with the real movements of the heavenly bodies. And like we learned all the pratim, that's Chav Tes, Yomim, and Yud Bei Shois, and Tas Chag, Chaywakim, we have to know that. And based on that, you already know when witnesses come, whether it was Shayach that they saw the new moon, as we learned over there in Rosh Hashanah, the minimum 6 hours. Minimum 6 hours after the conjunction, because the moon is constantly moving a little bit towards the east. And it's moving away from the sun every day. It's moving away from the sun 12 degrees. Because the sun is moving 1 degree, the moon is moving 13 degrees, be'erach. From west to east, not from east to west. East to west is the Galgal HaTshi, the Galgal HaShmini. But they're moving in the other direction, so that's the 12 days. More or less 12 degrees, 12 times 30, has to 360, that's more or less. So they needed to know the movements, and they counted days. And the Mekadosh HaChodesh, another detail that we learned, that we don't make Rosh Chodesh in the middle of a day. We don't make Rosh Chodesh in the middle of a day, because since a month is comprised of days, so Rosh Chodesh has to be one unit that is used for the count. So Menei Yomim similarly count days and be Mekadesh Atzeres. What is counting days? The Torah says Tispuru Chamishim Yom. Oh, Zok the Braisa, Zok the Rabba Bar Shmuel, Ma Chodesh Lemenu Yav. How long is Rosh Chodesh? It is the unit, which is a day, that is used to make it. If you can please take that off, that would be very helpful. Afatzeres limenu eha. What does that mean? Atzeres limenu eha means that Shavuos is 1 day. It's a 50-day Yom Tiv. So if we can just pull it out, that resolves everything. Afatzeres limenu eha. So we have a problem now. Yeah, Zayda. What's the problem is that if Shavuos is 1 day, so where do we get Tashlumin from? This is 1 day. My love, Gomar Mechoidish, Ma Choidish Yom Echad, Afatzeres is only Yom Echad. Now, we know that Atzeres is Yom Echad. The point is that there is nothing from Yom Tiv, nothing that goes beyond 1 day. Answers Rava, Amar Rava, I love your Braisa. But your Braisa not only is not a kasha, your Braisa is my proof. The Tizbira, is this logical? Is this logical to bring the Braisa of Rabbi Bar Shmuel as a question? No. Otu Atzeres only Yoimei Monenon? Do we only count days? Did the Torah only write Tisberu Chamishim Yoim? Shvuei Loi Monenon? Do we not count weeks? No, it's not true. The Torah writes count weeks. Not only that, V'ha'amar Abayim Mitzvah Lemin Yoimeh. As it says, and this is a pasuk in Emor, Tisberu Chamishim Yoim, and also there's a mitzvah to count weeks, as it says in this pasuk in A, Shiva Shavuos Tisber Lach. And as we spoke out, the big sheet of the briskers, they hold that now we follow the Bahag. Right, if you miss a day, a full 24 hours, you don't make a bracha. He held the Griz. I think that the brisker Rav held that if you didn't miss a full week, you don't make a bracha when it comes to the days. But you make a bracha when it comes to the weeks. And it could be Bizman Shabeis HaMikdash Kayim that you would make 2 brachas. It's a separate mitzvah. So just like Punkt Fakert, the unit of Shavuos is based on a week, fits. So there has to be some din in Shavuos that's connected to a week. And not only you have this and that, but from these 2, which one is considered more important? Void, it's called Chag Shavuos. Now we know that Shavuos also means Shin for the Shavuos, the base for the Bikurim, right? Ein for that Seres, the top for Torah. You have all these nice Ramazim, but Shavuos meit avach. Pichasidis, the double oath, we swore to be loyal to God, God swore. But Shavuos means, the fact that it's called the holiday of weeks, it means that we emphasize the week part of the counting. Week meaning not Shvach, not W-E-A-K, W-E-E-K. Oh! I know English. Here we go. So Bekitzer, that's the answer of Rabbi Oish. It's all back to the Hekesh. Now, source number 2. Chavre, we are on Yud Zayin Amid Bey, 6 lines from the bottom. The Bey Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov Tanem. The Kavanaki. He says that Markram. Chavre, you have to appreciate this. We're gonna, if you have a Parshas Emor, right, that Perek Chav Gimel, right, what we read on Yom Tov. If you're going to go to Psukim, Chav Aleph and Chav Beis, that are juxtaposed one to the other, Pasik Chav Aleph, Ukirasem, Be'etzem Hayem Hazeh Mikra Kodesh Yelachem. We're speaking about Shavuos. And interestingly, what does the Torah write? I know that this is generally the Parsha of Yom Tovim, but the Torah in the next Pasuk speaks about the mitzvah of Peah. That when you reap your fields, I didn't quote it correctly. So you have pay. Now, look at now what we're doing in Torah Shabbal Peh. We're simply juxtaposing the words of Kurasim. Kurasim, by the way, Kurasim means, in English it's called convoking. Like Meruft Ois, you are imbuing a time with Kedusha. We're Mekadosh the Chodesh. We're Mekadosh the Yom Tov. Ukarasim ubekutzrechem. Which means, which is the holiday that isn't only a convoking, a mikra, a kodesh, but which one? Because that's all 3. The holiday that is in the time of reaping. Reaping is done Shavuos. That's the rule. That's why Bikurim is brought from Shavuos. Unlike Sukkos, for example, whatever was already reaped, those things that needed to be left out to dry, which was a common thing, was left out to dry, and it was ingathered Chag HaOsif. That's Sukkos. But the Chag HaKotzir, the Kotzir boy, when is there a Chag? On the Chag, you're doing reaping. Now that's a problem. On the Chag, you're doing reaping? You can't do that. But on the Chag, you're doing reaping. That's Chag HaTzeres. That's the meaning of the Smichos. This is all part of the limud. 1 second. On the day that you're calling a holy day, you're doing then the reaping? Emas. Ilay me b'yamtev, ktsira b'yamtev misharei. You can ask, why not? Eichel nefesh. So what did we learn? We learned from the Yerushalmi that only Milisha ve'elach. That was the whole theme in Mesechtas Beitza. We're learning basically a lot of laws. We're reviewing Mesechtas Beitza because really anything which will remain just as fresh as, there's no upside of doing it on the day of. Mela, kneading and on, it's fresher, which is taka why we can bake bread on Yom Tov. Midrabanan, you can create a fire, you have to use already a lit fire. That's only midrabanan. But coming back over here, reaping is asur, even on Yom Tov. Elolav must mean that the Torah is being meramis, that there are days that are still called a holy day in the context of tashlumin, simei choil. We spoke out the sikh at the end of last class. But still, the fact that you can bring a carbon, so it's connected to the Kedusha of Yontiv, and you are allowed to reap. Wow. Elav tashlumin. Now, don't think that Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, who brought down this braisa, did not know of, and more importantly, does not need the limud of Rabbi Elazar Amar Rabbi Oishia. Says the Gemara, "Va'afal gav de itmer de Rabbi Elazar Amar Rabbi Oishia." Even though we already know his source, we all need the second source of Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. They need each other. One is incomplete without the other, and as the Gemara explains, Elazar Amar Rabbi Oishia. I would have thought that since it's learned from the smichos, right? Chag HaMatzois, Chag HaShavuos, Chag HaSukkos, Ma Tashlum Shechag HaMatzois, Asar Asiyas Malacha. Can you imagine? One might have erroneously said, you have a hekesh, go all the way. It's called Ein Hekesh Lemechza. Shkoyach. So there is an isur of melacha throughout all of the 7 days, as we mentioned, as we're going to learn a lot more in Daf Yud Ches. Chol hamoyed, but there's a moyed aspect. There is an isur of malacha. Maybe af tashlume yatzeres nami aser basiyas malacha. Maybe there would be an issue with doing malacha during the days of tashlumin until Yud Beis. Or again, you're right that Abdavid right is telling everyone that there's a shita in the poiskim that say maybe 13 days. Oh. So Kumash Mulan, that's why you need to have the Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. The fact that the Torah says you can reap, reaping is something that you cannot do on Yom Tov. Reaping is something that normally you cannot even do on Chol HaMoed, unless it's a davar ha'avid, if you remember, because certain things, if they remain on the field and they're not cut off, then they are overripe. But if it won't be for that, you can't do it. You need that to tell you that tashlumin is only for korbanos and for nothing else. Now let's go in the other direction. Had we only had that, don't forget, he came first. He's the Tana. Then Daf Yud Ches on the top. Lo Yodana. I take a know from Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov that there is a time that you are allowed to reap, but it's still considered holy in the context of tashlumin. But for how long? We don't know for how long. Lo Yodana Kama. How many days? That's Kamash Malon, Rabbi Eliezer ben Rabbi Oishia. It's Tafasta Meuta Gavaldik, that we know it from Chag Pesach. It's a total of 7 days. And now the final source for Tashlumim, Zakti Gemara, the second line from the top of the Amid, Reish Lakish Omar. The third source is from a pasuk in Parshas Mishpatim. The Torah says, Vechag HaKotzer. Again, this is very similar to the way Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov's Braisa had the limud. Again, the festival of the harvest, that's the pshat. But he's darshaning. What is he darshaning? Ezehu chag sha'ata choygig v'koitzer herst mimelerent. Chag means chagiga. There is a day that you can bring the chag and you can reap. Again, that's atzeres. Again, the same problem. Can't be atzeres mamish. Amos ilay b'yontiv ksira b'yontiv misharei. Must be again tashlumin. And again, the same thing that we had above. So you see, the Reish Lakish also needs to have the limit of Amar Rabbi Elazar, Amar Rabbi Oishia, from where to learn how long. But there has to be a concept of Chag HaKotzer. Now, this way of darshaning has to be consistent. So the Gemara is going to have a problem with this way of darshaning. Amar Rabbi Yechanan, or Amar Lei Rabbi Yechanan, again to his brother-in-law. Ela ma'ata, if you are teaching Chag HaKotzer, not only the pshat, the festival of the harvest, but you're teaching it, it's a day where you bring the Chag and that you are allowed to do Kotzer. Ela ma'ata, when it says regarding Sukkah's Chag HaAsif, the word Asif means the festival of the ingathering of the crops. Now we got a problem. Exeu Chag sheyesh b'yasifon. Which holiday is the holiday at the time of the ingathering? That we know that's the holiday of Sukkot. And if we're teaching, if we are interpreting that there is a day in which you can bring the Chagiga and you can gather the produce, that doesn't fit. Emas, Ilayim b'yamtiv. Can't be. Malacha b'yamtiv mishari. How can you do a malacha on yamtiv? My friends know what's Ktsira I get. We learned the Mishnah in Shabbos Ayin Gimel. What's the isur of gathering? Ma'amir. I just want you to, it's good to review this. The isur of gathering produce is a very limited isur. It's only the makim gedulai. Ein ma'amir acher ma'amir. It means if you have on your Shabbos table a bowl of apples and they spill out, zorg zechnish, you can gather them in. But in the field, in the place where you harvested it, in the place where it was never gathered before, there's an isur of ma'amir, midairai, one of the lamates. Oh. So it must mean ela b'chayla shel mayed. So you want to answer it's chayla shel mayed, which would answer, but it's not a good answer. Why not? Because chayla shel mayed mishari. Who told you? Who told you that you can do it on chol hamayid? Here is where we will unpackage with greater detail. The approach chayla shel mayid is a lot more mayid than chayl. And whatever is not allowed on Yom Tov is not allowed on chol hamayid unless you find a heter. And without the heter, then you can't do the gathering even on chol hamayid. So what's the solution? The solution is, the noise is nicht gut. Ella, chag haba b'zman hasifa, that no, don't give me this drasha that it's the day in which you can bring the Chagiga and which you can do the reaping. A day that you bring the Chagiga and that you can do the ingathering. No. It's just defining Ella Chag Haba Bisman Hasifa. It's the simple pshat, the festival that is during the time of the year where you do the ingathering. Hachinami Chag Haba Bisman Ketzira, and therefore he rejects this whole approach of Reish Lakish. All right, and l'chayda, that's the same rejection. Well, let's leave it with Reish Lakish. Okay, Nakuda. Comes the Gemara and says, the fact that Rabbi Yochanan challenged the permissibility of gathering produce from the field in the house on Chol HaMoed. Reish Lakish did not respond to Rabbi Yochanan by saying that what? There's no problem doing that on Chol HaMoed. Is a raya that not only Rabbi Yochanan, but even Reish Lakish mechlal de tarvayu sfira luhu, the choylol shel mayed aser basiyas malach. They both subscribe to the principle that you may not do work on chol hamayid, and now min nohanamili. And we're going to read the Rashi like we mentioned, and the Tosfos after we learned a few more lines in the Gemara. And this is going to be one of the main sources where together you have the Machlokes Rishonim, how to read all of this. In other words, L'kula Alma, without having the 5 Atarim that we're going to review in a moment, you may not do work on Chol HaMoed. And L'kula Alma, there's psukim that Chazal bring. The question is, do we approach the sugya as these psukim are only a smachta? Or do we approach this taka to be sources that biblically one is forbidden to do work on Chol HaMoed? So let's go. So now, Mino Hanamili, what will be the source of this Isur Melacha, the Tana Rabbanan? It says in Parshas Mishpatim, Es Chag Hamatzois Tishmoir. What does the word Tishmoir mean? This is the klal. The word Tishmoir means loisase. The word Tishmoir means Shoimreyu min melacha. Guard it, don't do melacha. When? Shivas Yamim. Shivas Yamim. So limeid al chaylo shel moyed shu asur basiyas melacha. These are the words of Rabbi Yoshia. Comes along Rabbi Yochanan and he says, "You're right, but I don't even need that." Einot tzarich. Why not? Because I have a kal v'chaymer. Now listen to this kal v'chaymer. Ma rishin v'shvi. She'ein kedusha lefneim v'lachareim. The first day of Pesach, the last day of Pesach, the Torah writes explicitly that you may not do melacha. Now these are days that don't have both kedusha lefneim and kedusha la'achreim yet. Also basiyas melacha chol hamoyed, which is sandwiched in between. You like this logic? The first and the seventh day, sheyesh kedusha lefneim achareim is einoi din sheyehi asur basiyas melacha. Avade, you can't do melacha. What's the question on this logic? If that's the logic, then you should never be allowed to work. Because why not call a weekday Chol HaMoed Shabbos? Every weekday you have Shabbos before. That's the logic. So they want to know, Sheishis mei bereishis rechichu, sheyesh kedusha lefneim en achareim umotarim basiyas melacha. Now I just want to make a quick ha'ara, and this fits al pi Kabbalah that I've always quoted the Zohar that Shabbos the name is Baruch Kula Yomim. Or in Chassidus, the emphasis is more that in the beginning of Parshas Bahar, the Alter Rebbe's whole big Maimer is the contradiction that it sounds like from one pasuk that when we entered the land of Israel, first we counted 6 years Shemitah, it's similar, and then the 7th year of Shemitah. But there's one pasuk that was mashma that you begin with Shemitah.
Same as if you lost and you could lose count of days.
Okay, so is in the Tanoim, what do you do if you've completely lost your notion of time? What comes first, Shabbos or the weekday? And we have both as emes. So in Olam Hazeh Gashmi, what came first? It came the 6 days. And then came Shabbos. But there was an inyan that prior to the 6 days of creation came a Shabbos. So, and that fits because the Gemara is not just speaking about any weekday. Sheishis Yimei Bereishis. I know that you can get out of it by saying Sheish Yimei Bereishis means the weekdays, but no, even the 6 days of creation has Kedusha before and has Kedusha after. And also going back to the previous Perek, when we spoke about the Ein Darshan. And Ein Darshan, so we spoke about this, a Yesh and an Ayin Be'emsa. No, there's Shabbos, and then there's a vachadik in between. So why don't we say, Elamah, we don't have this logic. So the Gemara says, no. The reason why during the 6 days of the week, right, there's no dinner, there's no Isur of Asiyas Malacha, is not because how will you make a living, not because of that. It's because you see from the Torah that you don't bring a carbon musaf. Choyloi shel moyed, yesh carbon musaf. Now what's very important to get the flow of the Gemara, why we'll leave for another time. But what the Gemara is saying is that we changed the din. We're not putting two steps together. If we have both steps together, then the next question won't make sense. Reject the Kedusha Lifneim V'Achareim. Rabbi Yonasan is saying, I don't even need to have the pasuk that you quoted from Mishpatim as Chag HaMatzos Tishmor Shivas Yomim, because since there is the bringing of a carbon musaf or karbanos musafin during Chol HaMoed, that's why it makes sense, if there's Musaf, it should be Yasir Melach. That's it, that's the standalone logic. And now comes a new question. Have a kasher, Rosh Chodesh Yechiach, Sheyesh Boi Karban Musaf, or Musaf Asiyas Malacha. Now Rosh Chodesh doesn't have Kedusha Lefnei V'Achareim. Many times when the Gemara goes on these back and forths, we start to build up. If this would have been a build-up Gemara, then the next step doesn't make sense. We rejected the first. Now we're saying the reason why it's logical, because there's a carbon musaf. So the Gemara says, the Braisa says, what kind of logic is that? You see from Rosh Chodesh that you bring a carbon musaf and it's not asur b'asiyas malachim. Now, even this doesn't contradict the fact that there are certain restrictions, especially that women practice in doing malachim, but it's not your classic asiyas malacha, not even like Chol HaMoed. So the Gemara says, no. Rosh Chodesh, the Torah never uses the words mikra kodesh. That even on Chol HaMoed, the Torah uses the words Mikra Kodesh, right? Mikra Kodesh. Open up a Chumash and you will see that this pasuk is written at the end of the parsha of the Yomim Tovim, including the 7 days, including Chol HaMoed. It goes on everything. Gavaldik. So Hoyel v'kar Mikra Kodesh. Dinu she'asur b'asiyas melacham. That is the shita of Rabbi Yonasan. And now let's continue learning other sources before we're going to go back to the Rashi and the Tosfos. Tanya Idach, another source that what? We're looking for a source that Chol HaMoed is a day where, in principle, one may not do what we call malacha. We're speaking about malacha as defined for Shabbos and Yom Tov. It says in Parshas Emor, Kol meleches avoide lo yisasu. Now here's Gavaldik. So this is a pasuk in Emor. Rashi writes, and the next pasuk begins, Shivas Yomim Takrivu Ishal Hashem. I would like to find the pasuk, but I was looking at it before, and I don't want to waste anyone's time. But in Perek Chav Gimel, there's 2 psukim, and it's Gavaldik. So look, the pasuk, the first pasuk ends with the words Kol Meleches Avoida Lo Yisasu. The next pasuk begins with the words Shivas Yomim. The Hesed Rab David. Even though the Pshat, Shivas Yomam Takrivu Isha. No. Komaleches Avoidu Lo Yisasu Shivas Yomim. Put the comma after Shivas Yomim and juxtapose the 2 psukim. Take away the Soif pasuk. That's the drasha. Limeid, that's by Sukkos. This is psukim that we have in Chag HaSukkos. Thank you. Lamed Hey Lamed Vav. Gavaldik. So by Yom Rishon Mikra Kodesh. Pasuk Lamed Vav Shivas Yomim Takrivu Ishal Hashem. Because we just said by Yom, even by Chol HaMoed, you bring karbanos. But the drasha is, don't focus on the Takrivu. Just read the words Kol Meleches Avoidu Lo Yisasu. That's the end of Pasuk Lamed Hey, and just read the beginning of Pasuk Lamed Vav. Shivas Yomim Takrivu. Shivas Yomim. Gavaldik. Which means, from here we learn that even on Chol HaMoed, she'asur b'asiyas malacha, divrei Rabbi Yossi Aglili, comes along Rabbi Akiva and says, Rabbi Akiva oimer, einoy tzarech. Again, I agree, but I don't need that. I have something even better. Harei oimer, this is similar to what we had above. Eila mayadei Hashem, right? That's the Mikra Kodesh. So in other words, the fact, it's from the Vav of the V'goymer, the fact that it's called Mikra Kodesh, a convoking of holiness, that is the source that it is a Isur of Asiyas Malacha. Now, what is this Mikra Kodesh of the Pasuk Elam Ha'adei Hashem? If it's only referring to the first day, no. It already says regarding the first day of Yom Tov, Shabbosin, which means refrain, rest from doing work. If it's only speaking about the seventh day, or first and seventh, by the seventh it also says Shabbosin. Ha'ein HaKosav Medaber Elo, what's the additional Mikra Kodesh? Ela b'chaylo shel moed lelamdecha she'asur ba'asiyas melacha gevaldik Tanya idach, a third brayso, and now we're quoting a pasuk from Parshas Re'eh, where it says sheishes yamim, we're going into the wide lines, toichel matzos ubayoyim hashvi'i, the word is atzeres. Who knows atzeres means a restraint? Atzeres l'Hashem. What does that mean? It means don't do work, restrain from doing work. And here comes again a drasha. The drasha is, don't only restrain on the seventh day. The pasuk puts together the sixth day and the seventh day in the same verse to learn one from the other. Mashvi'i atzur, there is a commandment to restrain from working. Av sheishes yamim, you have to restrain yourself from doing labor. Atzurin. Second line, why don't we say Ima Shvi Atzur B'chol Malacha? So say Af Sheishes Yom HaMatzurim B'chol Malacha. It should be a bona fide, full-fledged Yom Tiv. That's why the Torah does separate the sixth from the seventh. Talmud Leimer, the third line by Yom HaShvi Atzeres, Hashvi Atzur B'chol Malacha Ve'ein Shisha Yomim Atzurin B'chol Malacha. Now, who is going to determine what and what not? This is a very important line. We find this when it comes to the Inuyim of Yom Kippur. This is not a common thing. And let's now go with Shitas Rashi that we're speaking about, an Isur Mido Oiraisa. Normally we don't find so many Hetadim for an Isur Doiraisa, but since the Torah separates the 6 days from the seventh, and the Torah did not define how and what and where, what Malacha, yeah, what Malacha not, so this is like a mitzvah that's being created in a partnership between God Almighty and the Jewish people. It was given over to the Chachamim. The Chachamim were the ones that are going to tell you, Eze yoim asur ve'eze yoim muter. First of all, which day is asur, which day is muter? What does that refer to? Zakt Rashi, that refers to b'chlal. To determine when Yom Tov is, you have to determine when Rosh Chodesh is. Who determines when Rosh Chodesh is? Unlike Shabbos is Mekadsha v'Kaima, no, Yom Tov is Mekadesh Yisrael. That's number one. So first of all, when is the first day? When is the 15th? When is the 16th? And not only that, it's not only that they determined what's the day of the month. More than that, even when they already determined that. And now it's the 16th. It's already Chol HaMoed. Even on Chol HaMoed itself, Ezu Malacha Surah, the Ezu Malacha, that is Muteres. And I want to review that one of the 5 Hetadim that Musaran HaKosav L'Chachamim, you have the concept of a David HaAved, with all of the pratim that we learned, that if you're going to have a loss of principle, all right, let's not get into the loss of profit. You have a malacha that's called the Tzoyrech Hamoyed. You have a concept called a Maisa Hedyet, right? That which will be a heter. Then you have a Tzoyrech Mitzvah and a Tzoyrech Rabim. These are the 5 rules that we have to review, that we learned in the beginning of Masechtas Beitzah. And now I want to read the Rashi, and then we'll read the Tosfos. So middle of the Amid, more or less, Rashi Divrei Hamaschal Ha Harei Lo Mesaran HaKosav Elo L'Chachamim. That we began in the beginning of Moed Katan. Thank you for the correction. But on one hand, there's a smichus. On the other hand, the Torah separates the 6 days from the 7th day. And v'loy peidish ezu hamuteres ezu asura da ure'ei shalom yosanan el lachachamim hayoidim lahaven al ezeu lahater haheter va'al zeu lahater ha'isur. Number 1, Ezu Yantav al Pi Kiddush Re'iyah, and therefore that's going to be a full-fledged Asur B'chol Malacha, and Ve'ezu Hu Chayla Shal Moyed She'einu Asur B'chol Malacha. In other words, God says you can't work. The Chachamim defined But when you are doing that which the Chachamim teach, that is what God said you can't work, that's God's commandment. The Torah said on Yom Kippur, that's the most similar din, that ta'anu es nafshay seichem. And we know that ta'anu goes beyond the isur of achila and shesiya, and sicha, which can include in shesiya, consumption. And when the Chachamim define the other inuyim, it's not a din derabanan. They are defining the meaning of the word in the Torah of ta'anu es nafshay seichem. The things that we may not do on Chol HaMoed is a Isur De'oraisa, holds Rashi and many with him. Now the Tosfos, the big Tosfos, Choyloi Shel Moed, Asur Yes Malacha, right, L'choyra Mashma, just read in the beginning of the Tosfos, right, the second Tosfos in the Amid, that the Malacha mitasra ba midoraisa. And V'kashal Rabbeinu Tam. But them kein davar ha'avid, the kama malachis, the sharin and hasam, hechem mishtaru. How is it permitted? And I'm going to scoot down. And therefore, mikol makayim mashma. I know I'm jumping in the middle of the Tosfos. Lefi ha'emes the loy mitzvah rak midrabanan. And all of these psukim are called an asmachta. And the huge nafkaminas goes without saying between following the approach of the Rishonim that like Rashi versus those who hold like Tosfos, beginning with b'chal if they have a suffix. Let's begin with that. There's a rule, suffix d'oraisa l'chumra, whether it's midoraisa l'chumra, the Rashba, whether it's midrabanan l'chumra, but l'chumra, suffix midrabanan is l'kula, v'chulei. Okay, we're back inside the Gemara. Says the Gemara that we are referring back to our Mishnah and Daf Yud Zayin. The Mishnah spoke about a scenario where people are going to bring the karbanis, even according to Mesilah on a Sunday, Lamashal, when Shavuos falls out on Shabbos. And yes, there is this unique din. We're going to use the words of Tosfos Rid and the other Rishonim that introduced the concept of Isru Chag. Ad Hayoim, there are dinim regarding Isru Chag. However, in this case, again, when Shavuos falls out on Shabbos, we allow umotorim behesped v'taines. We are allowed to eulogize. We are allowed to fast on Isru Chag. Shaloi lakayim is divrei ha'imrim. Not to give any substance to those who say that Shavuos will always be Achar Shabbos on Sunday, because if you will always only bring the Omer Mimachras HaShabbos, wrongfully teaching it on Sunday, the day of the 16th will be the day of Shavuos. It's always going to be the same day of the week. Says the Gemara, Ve'hotanya. Have a kash on that. Ma'aser happened. Umeis Alexa. Hasto Alts. Alts is in the Gemara. Hafachba v'hafachba. Alexa died. The death of Alexa begins in Lud. No, only kosher phones. And all the Yidden came to eulogize him, but Rabbi Tarfin. Why? Because because it was on Yom Tov. On Yom Tov you can't eulogize, and right away the Gemara interrupts this Beraisa. Yom Tov Salkadaitach. No. People coming, right? We just quoted in the last Amud that Tchumen. By the way, Tchumen, we should have said Tchumen is an issue also on Yom Tov, like on Shabbos. Yeah, we spoke out on the last daf. If it's Daraisa, if it's Yud Beis Mil, if it's 1 mil, 2,000 amma. You can't go beyond the Tchum. So it can't mean that people came before the Hesped, right? Yom Tov Salkadaitach v'be Yom Tov Mikasu. Ella, the second line before the bottom of the Amid. It must mean, no. What happened there was, it was Yom Tovoyach. Yom Tovoyach means it was on Sunday. It was the day after. The day after. And here you see that you can eulogize, answers the Gemara Loikasha. And you cannot eulogize. Loikasha, no, very important. Kan, meaning the Braisa. That wasn't, Shavuos wasn't on Shabbos. The Yom Tov Shechaliyah is Achar Shabbos. Any other day. The day after was not Sunday. Yeah, Lochoitzi milibon shel tzedukim is not relevant. Our Mishnah is Yom Tov Shechaliyah is b'Shabbos. Again, here we have this concept, like we said, of Isru Chag. I just want to share a beautiful word of the Rebbe that, in the context of that, why is it that the Torah recorded the event of Sinai in Yisrael and in Mishpatim? Aside of the separation, that Ramban noch says, Gavaldik, that all of the mitzvahs recorded in the Torah, noch in Parshas Yisrael, from Shvi and on, the few dinim, and all of Parshas Mishpatim is an elaboration of the Aseres HaDivros. And that Ramban that doesn't subscribe as liberal as Rashi does, that Ein Mukta Mamucha B'Torah, he has a whole different shita about the whole record of the Yisrael Mishpatim. But let's go Chumash Rashi. We learn Chitas. Why did the Mishpatim was given later? Mishpatim was given later. So why do we say, and why did we, and then we go back to Maimed Har Sinai. The Nakuda the Rebbe gives is that by Maimed Har Sinai there were two parties involved. There was the Noisen HaTorah, Hashem, and then there were the Makabli HaTorah, the Jewish people. And each party had their own experience. You know, Keil Deois, Havaya, the greatness of God is that God understands our perspective. And when we have to be godlike, we have to do our best to understand the other's perspective. In other words, Hashem recorded his experience of Sinai, that's Yisrael. And then there is the experience that we had, Parshas Mishpatim. Maybe the concept of just Yisru Chag, and especially as it relates to Shavuos, the day after, because there is celebrating Matan Torah, and then we want to celebrate our experience. B'chal, we need time, especially b'chutz la'aretz. Takes time. So you have like another day, and there's an extension aside of the Tashlumin. There's a special connection of the Yisru Chag to Shavuos that we are, so to say, celebrating our moment of taking it all in, halachically expressed now. Not saying Tachnun, we don't say Tachnun until Yud Beis Va'ad B'chlal, but there's other special dinim. Let's go about eating extra food, that's always a good one. Elevating the food, the koyach of kedusha, of going into the lowest activities and making it holy, that we have, which we specifically connect to the day after Yom Tov that we called Yisru Chag. Chevra, let us start. Be ready. We have another 10 minutes. We're going to turn to Daf Chai, to Daf Yud Chesam and Beis. And we gave a few good words of introduction, and now let's start reading the Mishnah inside. Says the Mishnah, we are going to dinim of Tuma and Tara. I wanted to add one thing I don't think we said in the intro. Why are the dinim of Tuma and Tara over here? Because we will see that even though there are so many stringencies when it comes to the laws of purity and impurity, there are certain unique leniencies that Chazal gave only over Yantif. Only over Yantif. And since we are learning a Masechta connected to Yantif, Masechta's Chagiga, that will be the nigladika reason why we're going to first speak about the general dinim of Tum and Tara, and you will see how stringent we are to better appreciate. Yet, nevertheless, for Yantif, there were and there are a gavaldika leniencies. Says the Mishnah, Noitlin Liyodayim, that if one's hands become a sheni, and remember, Chavra, we gave three options of how. Number one, the hands touch something that's tummy on the level of a rishon. Number two, that we touch scripture. Separated. Stam Yodayim Ashniyos. Who says you have to wash your hands to eat chulin will be the first question the Gemara is going to ask. But in order for you to take away that tumah for chulin whenever needed, you don't need to go to the mikveh, which is normally the only way we get rid of real tumah. Netilas yodayim is enough, suffices to permit you to eat chulin. And even on step number two, so again we have chulin, that's the lowest level in which it's the least susceptible to tumah. We care the least about it being tamei. One step above that is meiser sheni. One step above that is truma. One step above that is kachim. And the highest step is called, what we will call mechatos. So says the Mishnah that noitlam la yadayim l'chulin, and for meiser sheni and even for truma. Make no mistake, if a person is a rishon, that was the first Mishnah in Brachas, they have to go to the mikveh. Right? We are speaking about someone whose body is not tummy, only their hands are tummy. It's enough, only netilos yadayim, to allow that person to eat truma, but that's not the case to kachim. For kachim, matbilin. Chevra, matbilin does not mean your whole body. If one's hands is tummy on the level of a sheni, what do you need to do? You have to put your hands in memsa. Only your hands. But not netila, not throwing the water on your hands, but immersing your hands in the water. Zoi taiched Rashi. Now, vilachatos, and also if you want to touch mechatos, again, it's not enough to do just netilas yadayim. You have to be toivel. You have to immerse your hands in a kosher mikvah. However, im nitmu'u yadav. No, I'm sorry. Chodesh matbilin. Nekuda. Another din, when it comes to the chatas, we go even more chamur. What's the additional chumrah for mechatos? We're teaching chatos throughout. If you want to have contact with mechatos, that if one's hands became tamei, your whole body becomes tamei. But appreciate the words of the Mishnah. Im nitmu'u yadav. And like we mentioned, there's 3 sources for tumas yodayim: touching a rishon, touching sfarim, stam yodayim. The Mishnah is emphasizing that for source number 3, stam yodayim, even for mechatos, we don't say nitma gufay. When do we say that for mechatos? Forget about netilas yodayim, not even tfilas yodayim, your whole body. If your hands became tamei, touch tradition, that's worse. You touch scripture, that's worse. Stam yodayim means you don't know. Stam yodayim, like we also said, it's not about tuma. It's about not making kachim and truma repugnant from something impure. That's lesser of a problem. And for that, you don't have to go. We don't say your whole body is tummy. Okay, that was number 1. Let's go number 2. There's number 2 and number 3. Number 2, Zakt our Mishnah, when a person is tummy, on whichever level, for which they're going to the mikvah, they didn't go stam. They had in mind for what? So if a person goes to the mikveh having in mind, I'm doing it in order to eat chulin, even though be'emes chulin you can eat betuma, but many people took upon themselves the chumrah of eating chulin only betara. So good for you, eat the chulin betara. But huchzak only lechulin. If you want to eat ma'aser sheni, and you know that after you went to the mikveh you did not become tummy again, doesn't matter. The original tumah was never removed as far as Meiser Sheni is concerned. Sit with that concept. Tava la Meiser, you go from one step to a higher step, you have the same concept. Tava la Meiser, only Huchzik la Meiser. And for sure for Chulin, but also la Truma. Tava la Truma, only Huchzik la Truma, and for that which is underneath it, but not for Kodesh. Tava la Kodesh, Huchzik la Kodesh, but also la Chatas. In andere Werter concludes the Mishnah, Tavar la Chamur, Muta la Kal. The other way around is fine, right? But not lekal is not for the chamur. Taval v'lo yuchzak. For when if someone went to the mikveh with no intention at all, says the Mishnah, it's not even good for chulin. Ki'ilu loy taval. How important kavanah is. Din number 3 of the Mishnah, guys. We're going to come back to all this. We're going to unpackage it. We have a lot of time for this. We have to become warmed up with the concepts. Number 3. First of all, there's a unique tumah called tumas midras. Like we mentioned in our intro, normally when tumah is conveyed from a source to its recipient, it goes down a notch. One of the exceptions are by the unique people that are tamei on the level of av, not because they became impure from a corpse, but tumah that is coming out of their bodies made them tamei. As one example, a nida. One example is of, if they sit on something that was meant to be sat upon, if they lay on something that was meant to be laid upon, then not only do they convey tumah, but that item becomes tamei on their level. That's called tumas midras. So now, another rule. In the times of the second Beis HaMikdash, many people became relatively lax in the laws of tumah and tara. They were then called the Am Ha'aretz or the Am Ha'aratzim in Lashon Rabim, versus either the Chavir or the Parush. The word Chavir is used when we are not only addressing Tumah and Tara, when we are also addressing the dinim of tithing. And here we're focused specifically about being separated from Tumah, which is why we're going to use the word Parush. So says the Mishnah that Big Day Am Ha'aretz, even though the Am Ha'aretz is saying, I know that this garment was not sat on by someone who had the ability to convey Tumas Midras. Since in his personal life he's not that careful, not that he's lying, he didn't notice. Midras leperushim. Leperushim who are eating chulin betara. But it's not only that. Even people that are perushim, but if they're not kohanim, which means they never eat truma, so just like we said before in the din number 2, you go to the mikvah for one, it's not for the greater. Even big day perushim is still midras lo'echei truma. Wow. Big day oichel truma. And they're telling you, no, it's not midras. You want to eat kachim? It's by default, rabbinically, imagine considered an av. That's very powerful. Big day kodesh, midras lachatos. And as 2 examples, Yosi ben Yoyezer, who we just had in the mission of the Zugais, he wasn't just a Kohen, but we call him the Chassid of the Kahuna. Yet, v'hoya mitpachtoi midras lakodesh. Don't forget, he's a Kohen. Now, I know that Kohanim sometimes ate kachim, but let's not forget, a Kohen really worked in the Beis Av twice a year, and Yom Tiv. It means that he was normally careful to eat truma wherever he lived, and even his kerchief, I love this kerchief. I remember again my kerchief traumas. So the kerchief is used for many things. A kerchief was also meant to be sat upon. It's meant to blow your nose. It's meant to clean up, and it's also meant that if you need a pillow cover, you have a pillow cover. That's why it's included in Tumas Midras. So it was considered Midras for people who are eating kachim. Yosi ben Yoezer, can you imagine? The leaders of the Jewish people. He was called the Chassid of Kahuna. That's the rule. Since he was only aware of, cognitive of, I got to make sure that I remain taught for Truma, for Kachim, his kerchief has Avatuma. And likewise, Yochanan ben Gudgada, he didn't just eat chulin betara, but let's get the words. He would eat chulin on the standard of Kachim. He was way more careful. So you would sing, wow, he ate chulin al taras hakodesh. His kerchief. For people that I want to prepare the mechatas, you touched his kerchief, you're out. You're a rishon, midrabanan. Out me, you have to go to the mikveh, wait until the night. Kol yom avayis mitpachtoi midros lechatos. Givaldik. So Chevra, tomorrow, God willing, we will take up from the beginning of the Gemara towards the end of Perek Sheni, to be continued.